Listeners and viewers, welcome back to the next episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to have Veronica here again. Veronica was my first ever guest on the podcast, and it was just over a year ago. I think it was the start of August in 2024 when Veronica came on. So, Veronica, it's so good to have you here today.
I'm so excited, and I can't believe that it's been already a year. I was delighted to be your first guest, and I'm delighted again to be back.
Yeah, so good to have you. Yeah, it was so cool to have you on the podcast then because I literally had no idea what I was doing. And you were a great first guest to have along because you were so good and just made me feel comfortable and relaxed. And yeah, I think I've really enjoyed doing it since then, and it was a good start at the time. Veronica, what have you been up to then since we last spoke? Obviously, we've been in contact plenty on Substack and things like that, in between. But what have you been doing since August last year?
Wow, I didn't know that this question was coming. So I have to say to preempt this, I have a big bias for action. I do a lot of things go wrong, but it's just math. A lot of things actually do happen. So one of the biggest highlights for me as a creator since we talked in August last year, something a flashback, was to launch my Substack in Spanish. That was super exciting. And at the time, I didn't even know that I was going to do it. It was something that happened completely out of the blue and is a really cool story because it relates to you and the podcasting world. It came through a podcast, a random podcast that I did with a Spanish creator. I did not create any content in Spanish. I was not active in any network, social network in Spanish at all. She invited me and I said, cool, it sounds like a good opportunity. I've never spoken in my mother tongue before. Why not? I did this podcast and then people from the Spanish speaking community started coming to me asking for an advice. I landed four or even five coaching clients who wanted to grow on Substack, who wanted to grow their
Wow.
digital ecosystem. It took me a week to say, there's an opportunity, let's chase it, you can do it. And so that has been one of the biggest highlights since we talked last year.
Brilliant. That's so cool. Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's just I love the fact that anyone I speak to who can speak more than one language is amazing to me because we're from Northern Ireland and like we really don't speak anything other than English. So I'm always so fascinated and in awe of people who can speak multiple languages. So that's so cool. And the fact that you've actually got these like dual Substack publications or things going now where you've got one in English and one in Spanish is incredible. And do you find that is that a lot more work for you having to kind of do that and try and balance things up to try and sort of like duplicate the same maybe content across both aspects of it, or do you enjoy that process?
So the answer is yes to both. It's
Mm.
a lot of work and I enjoy the process, but it is a lot of work because I initially thought that it was going to be mostly translating. But then what I realized is that languages, they're not copy paste. And so if you still want to sound like yourself when you translate, you really have to do a lot of editing. You really have to do a lot of rethinking. So that's one thing. The translation, purely the translation takes a long time. And then the second thing that also took me longer than I expected is that communities and audiences, they're very different.
Mm.
And for example, while the English speaking community on Substack is generally quite advanced, it's very much North America led, it's really the leader in everything that is digital marketing and so on. In the Spanish community, first is a much less known platform. And second, people in the creative world are not as advanced. And so I do find that there's much more demand for topics that were very much relevant for Substack in English 1 or 2 years ago. So I
Mm.
also have to adjust a bit my message, my audience, making sure that I'm relevant. So that takes a lot of work. It's very fulfilling because it's wonderful to be able to create this community, especially in a language that is not yet as big by far as English. And I do find that it's a very tight community, and that makes it super, super interesting. One of the things that I have found that has helped me a lot, and this is not only for Substackers who want to write in two different languages, but in two publications, regardless of the theme, is that you create leverage. And when you know what you're doing in one publication, when you know your strategy, when you know how you have a content creation plan and all these things, you can use the same mindset and the same strategy. And that has helped me a lot to be able to take off and grow much faster than I did in the English one.
Mm. That's great. That's really, really interesting. Yeah, and again, I love what you're doing, Veronica. Like you're so good at presenting yourself, I think, on Substack, and your ideas are so clear, and it's clear why people are drawn to you and want to work with you, like on a one-to-one basis as well, whether that's in English or Spanish. How do you go about sort of marketing yourself as someone who people can work with on a one-to-one basis? Do you actively do that, or do you just kind of like present yourself on in the online space and people naturally are magnetically drawn to you in terms of your personality?
So one of the things that you and I have in common is that we are both introverts. And as a result of that, we don't particularly enjoy the hardcore sale of putting yourself out there and saying, this is what I do and all these things. And so what has worked well for me is to simply share a lot of the work that I do behind the scenes.
Mm,
One very simple but very effective practice is that every single time I have a one-to-one session with my founding members, that's how the journey of one-to-one starts with me. I take a screenshot and I write a little post where I'm sharing what we talked about. I welcome my new member and I talk about what their publication is about. So it's really a win-win because I share my work behind the scenes. It helps me build credibility, authority, but I'm also promoting someone else's work. And so what I have found is that very often people come to me because they have seen that I help other people in one-to-one settings. So
mm,
that's more my strategy. It's a subtle way of saying, this is what I do. And it's not only about one to one, I do that with my books, I do that with my services, with my courses. This is the behind the scenes. This is how I'm writing my book. And I find that that's a very soft way of attracting people to you. Also, you let them know how you work. My approach is very much we are partners. I don't like to call myself a coach. So I talk about we, I talk about co creation, I talk about the collective power of creativity. So that has helped me with the one to one. And in fact, today I have over 70 founding members total. This is
wow.
English and Spanish. And it's amazing because it's a great way of meeting these people in a much more intimate level. And what happens afterwards is that very often those are the same people who join my cohort, which I launched recently, who purchase my courses, who are very active in my community. So I really see these one-to-ones as seeds for something much bigger.
That's incredible. Yeah, the social proof you share is so powerful. I've seen that before. You doing that on Substack, and I think the natural response to that is I want to be part of that as well. I want to work with Veronica whenever people see that because they can see the person you're working with is so happy and engaged and glad to be working with you on a one-to-one basis. So simple and so powerful. And as you say, it's like a soft CTA. It's not a hard sell. You just show them what you already do, which is so effective. Do you like doing one-to-one work? Is that like something you find very fulfilling, working with someone on a one-to-one basis?
I find it very fulfilling and I get a lot at a human level. But to be very honest, I also find it very draining because it
Mm,
means that for 1 hour, you're constantly listening, actively listening. For me, it's not only that moment. I do a lot of homework to make sure that I go prepare into this cause. I've already identified areas of opportunity. I've already identified levers and so on. And so I find that if I do more than 2 sessions a day, it's very depleting for me. And
mm,
that's one of the reasons why in August this year, I decided to launch a cohort so that I can still do the same, but in a way that is more scalable, in a way that's more sustainable. I also position my sessions as strategy sessions because I really want to tell people, hey, I'm here to empower you. We are going to create this direction, co create this direction together. But my intention is to let you fly solo. And of course, there are people who want to come back and some of them they come on a monthly basis, not more, because otherwise it's really hand holding, and that's not something that I want to do. But I try to position myself more as a strategic partner than actually a coach, because my goal was never to become a coach. It's something that organically came to me because people started to come to me the same way that they might come to you. Hey, David, I'd love to set up my podcast because they see you doing podcasts. It was very similar for me. They see me publishing books or speaking in public. And so they started coming to me, hey, I'd love to do what you're doing. Would you offer one-to-one? And so that's how this whole thing started.
I love it. I love it when it's like organic like that. It's not a forced thing. It's all just very natural. Let's talk about speaking in public then, because you have just recently launched a new product. And I'm going to bring it up on my screen here now. This is why my table's bouncing around a little bit. So it's called Speak to Scale, Boost Your Business with Public Speaking, and it's available on Gumroad now. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Veronica? So why did you create this product, and who is it for? Who's the exact kind of ideal customer for this product?
So I created this product for the person that I was 2 years ago. When I was a creator, I was a writer. In my heart, I am a writer. That's how I started. I started writing on Medium, then I started writing books, and then there were crickets. And I realized that it was really hard to get people to read your work. Also, I realized that I had a small community, and so I was always talking to the same people, louder, but always
Yeah.
to the same people. And so at one point, I told myself, what are some things that I can do to reach new audiences and to make a bigger impact? And you have many ways of doing that. Some people, for example, they opt for paid ads, for example, which is something that I was never keen on doing, even though I tried and I was not very successful with it. Another one is trying to partner with other people who have other communities and networks so that you're really reaching different publics, different audiences. And one way to do so is to put yourself out there and start speaking in public.
Mm.
Why? Because there are a lot of people like yourself who have podcasts, who have shows, they might have YouTube channels. And then all of a sudden, instead of only talking to your, let's say, 1,000 subscribers, you might be talking to 5,000 people who are usually on YouTube, or you
Mm.
might be talking to 2,000 people who are on a podcast. And so for me, it came from a challenge of I'm not able to reach more people. I want to make more impact. How can I start doing it? So I solved a problem that I had. And once I was able to solve it, and I have a lot of, let's say, credibility in this, in the sense that in the past 2+ years, I've been speaking on public nonstop. I do live session, podcast, I speak in conferences, I do workshops for corporate. So all of this has been a journey, but it literally started from zero. I'm an introvert, as I said. English is my second language. I only started doing this in my 40s. And so I created this course because I wanted to empower everyone. And by everyone, I mean everyone to really get out there, go on a stage, go live on camera, grab the microphone, but it's going to be transformational. And I would say that with the rise of AI, even more, because it really allows you to be more human, to have more proximity, to connect with people in a different way. Different audiences have different preferences too. Some people love listening to ebooks, like my husband. I like reading a book. So how you cater for different people, that accessibility element is another one. So that's really the why. It was selfishly for me, I was able to solve this problem. And then I was like, well, there's so many other people who could benefit from these.
Mm. Yeah, I love that so much. I think the last time we spoke on the podcast, we talked about public speaking as well, and you sort of shared about your experience with that too. So anyone who's watching this episode or listening to it, go back and listen to the first episode too, and you sort of get the more of Veronica's backstory, I guess, in terms of how you got to this point, Veronica. Um, what would you say beyond the sort of like solidifying the authenticity for the creator by doing by public speaking? What other benefits does that kind of provide for maybe someone who's introverted and maybe is maybe worried about, I don't really want to put myself out there and kind of scared to be on the screen or be on a stage or behind a microphone. What's another reason maybe why, or are other reasons why they should maybe take that step and try putting themselves out there as a public speaker, would you say?
So there's another reason that is the business case. And it's as creators, if we want to take this seriously, if we want to take our creativity as a business and not as a hobby, we have to monetize. Very often it's an ugly word and we don't want to talk about monetization, but really, I would much rather live of my creative pursuits and projects than having to work for someone else and then have 1 hour a day to do this. Now, public speaking allows you to monetize in different ways. Personally, to make it very granular and very specific, ever since I started speaking in public, I was able to launch new services and offer for my community. For example, I started hosting webinars, which is something that I had never done until last year. So that was something that was exclusive for my paid subscribers. And guess what? The moment that I launched my paid webinars or my exclusive webinars, my numbers of paid subscribers started to go up much, much faster. Why? Because there's a higher perception of value than just a post, especially with AI now. So that's one idea, for example, on how you can create your own webinars, and it creates this sense of community, which is something that people are looking more and more. Another initiative that I launched this year, thanks again to public speaking, was Mastermind. I have no idea how to do a mastermind, but it's actually quite different from a webinar. A webinar is more you as the speaker presenter. Usually you might have some slides and so on. Mastermind is much more a discussion where you're kind of the moderator, you're having everyone involved, it's usually a smaller group. So I did this for my founding members. And again, I saw that there was a lot of positive feedback. And in fact, they said, can we have them more often? Once a quarter is not enough. So I was like, oh, no, we have to do them more often. So that's a second one. And then a third one that I was very hesitant because I personally find it very intimidating is doing live sessions on Substack in my case and also LinkedIn. And I find those particularly daunting because you don't know who's on the other side of the screen. And sometimes I do them with another creator, but very often I do them solo. And that's even scarier because it's you talking to yourself and looking at yourself on a screen. And back to monetization, what I have found is that when people listen to you, after usually they've read a couple of posts and they're familiar with your content, either they click with you or they don't. But if they click, then it's much easier and quicker for them to say, I'm ready to become a paid subscriber, or I'm ready to become your coaching client, or I'm ready to join your next webinar. And so I have found that live sessions, which I now do weekly because I personally found them so powerful, are really a great channel for monetization. So that's reason number two. It can help you boost monetization and create new channels for monetization in your offer.
I love that. Yeah, I've actually been thinking about, and I actually am going to start doing more live sessions solo myself as well because I was running like an office hours kind of thing for my publication, which is just text based. It was purely just paid subscribers could chat to me via the chat on Substack. But I do think there's something really powerful about being live and showing your face and them hearing your voice as well in terms of creating that connection. Veronica, can you give anyone any advice about going live? So if someone hasn't really done that before, maybe they're thinking about going live just solo by themselves in their publication to connect with their audience. And what are maybe some tips you would give them for preparing to do a live and then when they're actually running the live, how can they make that really effective?
So going solo is a different monster. So the first thing is that I would actually recommend to do it first with someone else because then you're going to be much more comfortable. You're going to know what the technology is like. So my advice number one would be join someone, like have a tag team, and that will really help you say, hey, this is actually not such a big deal. It's still a big deal, but it's just going to calm you down. Then, when you're thinking about doing it by yourself, what I find helps a lot is don't reinvent the wheel. Talk about the things that you already talk every day. One of my paid subscribers, Katya, actually asked me, she wanted to do a live, and she said, but what am I going to talk about? And I said, you're going to talk about what you talk about every single week, just a different format. So tell yourself that this is just a different way of telling the same story. And that's going to help you a lot. In my case, what I did for my first live that really helped me a lot, I picked a specific topic and I wrote down 8 common questions. So it was a question format, almost like a Q&A of common questions that my community asked me. In your case, let's give an example so that it's very clear for the audience. Let's say that you want to do a live solo, David, and I think this could be very relevant and it could be my 10 tips to launch your podcast.
Hmm.
That's it. So you would have your list, just bullet points. Number one, the mindset. And you say a couple of things about the mindset. Then you talk about the strategy. Then you talk about technology. Then you talk about engagement. And that way, without having a script, you have a roadmap and you know where you're going. And I find
Hmm.
that that really helps. So that's another tip. And something that's hard, but that has helped me a lot, is to have an idea on the time. How long do you want it to be? Because otherwise, one mistake that I see many people make is that it goes on and on and on, and you don't know how to start it. If you have a start and an end line in your mind, then you are in control, you have ownership, and you can always have a call to action. Like in the example that I just gave, hey, if you'd like to know more details about how to launch a podcast, check out my one-to-one sessions at davidmcelroy.com or whatever. So you can always make sure that is concise. And then another tip is having a call to action because otherwise people are like, oh, this was a great chat or monologue, I guess. But then what happens next? So make sure you don't lead your audience to a dead end street because we do that very often. If we don't have a call to action, people don't know what to do.
Mm. Yeah, that's great advice. I love that about lives as well because if you do have a nice clear structure, they do feel really like they're fun for you as a creator as well to do. It's a great chance to connect with your audience, your subscribers, and I love seeing comments appearing on lives as well. And you're trying to follow the comments as well, and also deliver what you're trying to say. But that kind of when you're in the moment, it's very authentic, it's very real, and I think that's a great way to connect with your audience in a very real way. Veronica, what are some tips maybe that you would give people for how to like mentally prepare themselves for doing any kind of public speaking or going live on Substack? Do you have any kind of like techniques that you'll kind of run through, like a ritual in advance of going onto a stage or going live on Substack that help you kind of relax and just be in the moment as much as possible?
Yes. So one thing that's very important personally for me, and everyone has their different routine, is that I'm a triathlete. Sport is very big for me, and exercising before anything important, it gives me a lot of clarity. For some people, it might be journaling, or it might be meditating, or it might be going for a walk. But what is the one thing that gives you mental clarity? I find that that's something that really sets you up for success. Another thing that is very overused, but we don't do it enough, is breathing. Like really intentionally breathing. And a lot of people, they think that taking a deep breath is like going on like that, when in reality, it's really from the diaphragm. And this is deep, relaxing breathing, just like now, that makes you feel composed and calm, and you're going to transmit that as well. And one tip that is not very overused but helps a lot is think about the opening. I call it the creative opening. This works very well if you're going to deliver a keynote, for example, or if it's more a presentation setting. The typical way of starting is, "Hi, this is Veronica. I'm going to talk about X." You have so many other ways of being more memorable. One of my favorite ways, when I'm talking to corporates, I create a bit of contract and I say, "Hi, I'm Veronica. I'm an author, I'm a public speaker, and I'm a CEM, which stands for Chief Executive Mom." Something that they don't expect at all. And people are like, "Oh, that was different," because in the corporate world, you don't expect that a lot. So, what is a creative opening that could make you memorable or approachable? It depends on what your intention is. Sometimes it could be a stat, sometimes it could be a thought-provoking fact, sometimes it could be a fun fact. But when you start that first sentence, the first opening, and you're in control, it's almost like, okay, I broke the ice, now I can go. And I think that that's a really good advice to start with a tone and set the tone that you want for the entire session.
Mm. I always find that telling a story about yourself is a really good way of kind of segueing into stuff as well, because especially if you can make it funny and you can make it like a little bit self-deprecating maybe as well, and that breaks the ice very powerfully too. Because if you can get people to laugh along with you, that really just evens things out. I always kind of find I used to be a youth worker, so I would frequently be up in front of a large crowd speaking myself, and I always find the story was just such a powerful way of breaking that ice right at the start. But no, great advice, Veronica. And I think anyone who's listening to this and is thinking, I want to be a public speaker, I want to go live on Substack, I want to do a podcast, etc. All this stuff is so effective and so useful. I love speaking to people like you who've done all these kind of things before, and they're speaking from a place of experience as well. Tell us briefly, Veronica, about maybe a time when you really came off a stage or you were at an event and you felt really energized by it, and why. What was special about that moment? I'm sure straight away you can think of something that you've experienced in the past. There was a real kind of high for you as a speaker. Why was that the case? Why was that like a really special moment for you as a speaker, and how did that feel at the time?
I have quite a few, but one of them was this year I went to the biggest conference that I've ever spoken at. It's called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit in Hong Kong, and it had around 1,000 people, maybe a few hundred in person, and then you had cameras and all of that. And I was so nervous, like the night before, couldn't sleep well, and all these things. And before going to the stage, I was going with people who I was very intimidated by. One was a chief of people of a massive company, the 7-Eleven in Hong Kong. Another one was the managing director of City Bus, which run all the buses in the city. And then me.
Mm,
And I had to really do a lot of positive self-talk and say, "Hey, I've earned my spot here. I've been invited. I have a different perspective. I bring a lot of different experiences." And so for me, going on that stage, it was a panel, and being able to share my story, I actually felt so confident and comfortable with what I was sharing. And I wasn't trying to pretend to be anybody else. I was there. My focus really shifted from me to the audience. And I left that stage feeling I said what I came here to say and to deliver.
Mm.
And that feeling of overcoming my own fears in such an intimidating scenario was like, wow, if I can do this, I can do anything. But everybody and anybody could also unlock their potential like that. To me, thinking that 3 years ago I was unemployed and then I was on that stage talking to people with these really senior executives, it was like, wow, this is the path. 3 years ago, I wanted to create a new path. This is the path.
I love that so much. I love those kind of stories. That was 3 years ago. Where do you see yourself 3 years from now going forward at this point?
I don't know. I've never been one of these people. You know, when the recruiters they ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I always had to make up my answers because I've never really had like these 5 year plan or these milestones. Also, I'm a big believer in opportunities. 3 years ago, my plan was not to become a public speaker, yet here I am. I think this comes partly because of the way that I grew up. Every 4 years, we had to move countries because of my dad's job. And so I never had a time horizon
Hmm.
that was much longer than that. And so when people ask me, oh, where are you going to be or what are you going to do in 4 years? I didn't even know in which country I was going to be living. So just to give some background, I think that comes from there. But if I had to think of 3 years from now, I would love to keep doing what I'm doing, but doing it better and doing it at more scale and having a bigger community. I feel that right now, 2+ years into this new path as a solopreneur, I have a really good foundation. I have the pieces of coaching, writing, my public speaking. So everything is there. It's a bit messy and it's a bit chaotic. I call it a Frankenstein business, but everything is there. And now is how do you refine it? How do you scale? How do you have better systems? But I don't want to be doing anything else. I want to be able to focus on what I'm doing today.
Brilliant. I love it. I love it. Veronica, tell me, we're just going to kind of go off on a slight tangent. Tell me about your book. So I think your book came out last year. Is it
It's
there?
here.
Is it? Love
It's
it.
here.
There it is, Anti-Procrastinator. Tell us about what that journey was like to get it published because you were fortunate enough to get published by a big five publisher with Penguin, I think it is. And what's that been like for you? What's it been like going out and speaking and doing like book events and everything as well as a public speaker?
So this is a huge topic, and so you bring me down, bring me back. But the key thing is to give some context. I had self-published two books prior to The Anti-Procrastinator, and then I had another book with an indie publisher, and then a big five. And the experience was very different in the sense that before I used to be in control, and I was the sole proprietor of my books, and I decided everything, pricing, launch, marketing, and all of that. To me, having an entire year from the moment it was written to the actual publishing for someone who is not very patient, it was quite an experience. What was great was working with a team, and I had editors from the structural editing to the actual editing, copywriting, proofreading, and so on. So that was fantastic. And then we published. One of the things that I want to be very candid and open about is that a lot of people, including myself, I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be with a publisher and they're going to do all the marketing for me and they're going to promote it and all of that. It wasn't really like that. I still had to do most of the marketing. I would say that other than the month of launch, which they support you with social media and so on, it's still the author who has to do all the heavy lifting. And yes, I've done a lot this year in terms of promoting my book. I went to India to a literary festival in Kerala in south of India. I'm the one who found that opportunity, not Penguin. I went to Singapore and that they helped me with, but the audience who came to my book launch in Singapore was brought by me, not by my publisher. And so, one thing that is very important for authors to be aware of is that being an author is not the action of publishing a book, it's a mindset. And it's almost a lifestyle if you want to publish more books like you and I do, is something that you're always doing. Today in this podcast, I'm talking about my book. When I'm on social media, I talk about my book. When I do workshops for corporates, even if they have nothing to do with my book, I still have a slide that said, hey, I'm an author. Here is my book. And so you really have to build your brand because no publisher is going to do that for you. So it's been an amazing experience. It's given me a lot of credibility. A lot of the corporates that I work for, they find it very inspiring that they have a speaker who has a book with Penguin. So that helps me get more public speaking engagement, speaking conferences. So all that part of the equity, the brand equity is great. But in terms of the actual promotion, it's still you who has to be there, day in and day out and do all the heavy lifting. And so, yeah, great experience. But just be very aware that it's always us, doing the heavy work.
Yeah, no, I've heard that from every author I've ever spoken to, and whether they're published with a big publisher or just with an indie publisher or just self-published, like so much of that effort and that work still falls on the writer themselves to promote the book. What would you say, Veronica, has been one of the key drivers in terms of promotion for your book? So is it literally just publishing on Substack, for instance, or social media? Is it doing those live events? And what's been something you've really seen that kind of a spike in interest after you've done it?
I think my community on Substack has been huge, and I think in the topics of self-improvement, it's easier than if you write fiction, for example, because in my case, so the anti-procrastinator, I talk about productivity, I talk about beating procrastination. I'm a creator, so it's very aligned with the things that I talk about day in and day out. How to speak in public, how to have better systems, all of these. And so it's very likely that people who already read your work are going to be interested in what you have to say. So I think that like being very active with your community. A couple of weeks ago, I did a podcast, for example, with the team at Build Scale. And I talk about procrastination. It wasn't about the book, but it was a good opportunity to then talk about the book, and I turn it into a post. So you have to have this always on mindset. So that's one, leverage your community. I always tell people, find your readers before you publish a book, because
Oh,
otherwise you're going to publish a book like I did with my first one, and then if you don't have a community, no one is going to read it. So you really have to find your readers, and it's a paradigm shift. We always think, oh, I'm going to be discovered. No, no one is going to be discovered here. We really have to put ourselves out there and find our readers. So this was one. Another one that helped me a lot is to be active on social media wherever you are in general. I'm not very active deliberately, so I'm mostly on Substack, which is more for my consumer, let's say, audience. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, and that's more because I'm a public speaker. And so that's where I can potentially find heads of human resources, head of learning and development, who are people and teams who are more likely to book me as a speaker. And so there I'm very active. And I talk a lot about my work as a public speaker, but I also talk about my books. And this is a really cool story that happened very recently. I received a message from Penguin India. Now, I have nothing to do with Penguin India. I was published by Penguin Southeast Asia, which is a completely separate division. They work completely different units. And she told me that she had been following me for years, or 2+ years since I started writing on Medium. And then she saw my work on LinkedIn. And then she saw that I was published by Penguin Southeast Asia. And we had a call. And this happened last Friday. In the call, she told me that they loved the work that I was doing. They saw that I was in India in the fair that I mentioned before, and they invited me to go to the World Book Fair in Delhi,
wow.
India, in January 2026. So she said, this is the fair. We'd love to have a booth, have you as one of our Penguin authors. And our plan is to publish 1,000 copies. I have massive imposter syndrome. And your goal is to sell them. And I was like, sure, let's do it.
That's
But it
incredible.
shows that it's amazing, right? It's amazing. And of course, no one knows, nothing is guaranteed, but the harder you work and the more you put yourself out there, the higher the chances of someone like Penguin India or another publisher seeing you and saying, hey, I love the work that you've done. Would you like to have a talk maybe for your next book? And that's how these things happen, is by
Mm,
creating opportunities yourself.
yeah.
So that's another big one. Put yourself out there. You never know who's going to be watching. You never know who's listening. Every now and then on Substack, I see people who say, hey, I'm an editor at this big publisher. So there are probably more people reading your work than you think. And it might be publishers, it might be editorial reviews, it might be literary magazines. So the opportunities are there. And if they're not there, you can create them yourself.
Yeah, brilliant advice, Veronica. I love that, and it's so exciting for you as well. Getting those opportunities, and you deserve it because you do put yourself out there all the time, and you're very consistent with that. And not all writers are. A lot of book authors, especially, will go like hard at it at the start, and then kind of drop off and stop talking about their book. But you're very consistent about it. Have you got plans to write more books? You sort of mentioned that briefly in passing there, but do you have any other plans for books in future?
So for now, I'm still focusing on this book because even though I published it already in February, which is it will be a year almost, for me, the work of publishing a book is more than a year. And so I really want to make sure that I don't just publish and vanish, which is what many authors do. I want to make sure that I give this book a good shot, that I'm going to Singapore in November to the Singapore Writers Festival. Then in January, I'm going to India. I've turned it into a workshop. And so I want to be able to promote it and sell it as a corporate workshop to organizations in Asia. So I feel that there's still a lot of work that I need to do with this book. The answer is yes. I don't know when, I don't know what it's going to look like. So it's a very undefined plan at the moment. But I think once you start writing books and you like not only the process of writing a book, but the lifestyle that it brings, going to literary festivals, talking to readers, going on podcasts. If you enjoy that, then it really becomes a lifestyle. It's like being a triathlete for me. It's not something that I do all the time, especially now as a mom. This year, I'm only going to do one triathlon, which is in November, but it's always there. It's always something that I train for. It's always something that's in my mind. So yes, there will be a book when, I don't know. You'll be the first to know.
Brilliant. I love how you said I'm only going to do one triathlon this year. And like most people, that'll be like one thing to do in their lifetime, and you're only doing one this year. It's incredible. But yeah, no, that's brilliant. You should definitely write more books. Like I think you've got more books in you. And would you ever consider writing fiction, or is it just purely nonfiction?
I would love to write in fiction, and you are one of my role models for that because you just pump these books of fiction. I'm like, this guy is amazing, and he promotes and he does all these things. So I do think that you're amazing. I do have this issue that is I can't write if I haven't lived it. Maybe something that is in my mind, but I really struggle with the fiction element of writing a fiction book. I've
Hmm.
never written anything that I haven't lived. That's why my writing is so authentic and transparent because it's really what I
It's
have
your story.
experienced.
Yeah.
And so I would love to have that creativity, and maybe I should join like a creative workshop or something like that because I love the idea of just putting yourself in a different world and creating all these different characters and all of that. The closest I've ever come to doing that is helping my 6 year old when she wanted to publish a book. It was called The Story of the Little Rabbit. She created the whole story with the characters, very, very short book, and I
Brilliant.
helped her self-publish. So
Love it.
my daughter is much better at fiction than I am.
Love that. That's brilliant. You should maybe consider doing like a fictionalized version of your own story then. Maybe you could tell your story, how I think maybe during the pandemic, did you get stuck in a country? Was it in Hong Kong you got stuck in, or was it somewhere different?
Australia,
Australia, sorry,
Australia.
yes. And I mean, even a fictionalized version of that would be a really intriguing book to read as well. And you can obviously then feed in other stuff from that. But yeah, I always encourage anyone who's written a nonfiction book or who writes on Substack or Medium, whatever, to try fiction because I think if you can do one version, you can definitely do the other side of things as well. That's brilliant, Veronica. Like it's so cool hearing what you're up to and stuff. Maybe just a couple more questions, and I'll let you go. Because you mentioned there's a typhoon going on right now where you are, so I don't want to keep you too long in case there's things happening in the background. Um, can you give us one productivity tip? So one anti-procrastinator tip, should I say? Maybe from your book or just that you know off the top of your head for anyone who's a writer who wants to maybe write a book or start a podcast or be a public speaker. And what is one thing you can do to kind of get yourself moving today? One simple thing you can do.
I love the strategy and the process of reverse engineering. And I'm going to give an example to illustrate what I mean. When I signed the deal with Penguin, they only gave me 3 months to write a book and send the manuscript, which I was shocked. It's like I have a life, I'm not just a writer. And I got really stressed. And then I was like, okay, calm down, have a system. And I realized that actually a standard book, and I write in a very concise way. So my books are typically 50 to 60,000 words. And I started to do the math. And I realized that if I wrote 1,000 words a day, which is an article, a newsletter article, not particularly long, that meant that in 2 months, being consistent, I could have a first draft. And that gave me an entire month to go through the editing, go through it again, buffer in case I miss some days. And so that's an advice about productivity that for me it has worked for writers, which is what we're talking about. But in sports as a triathlete is break it down into the lowest common denominator. And then your goal is going to be much more achievable. Because if someone listening to us wants to write a book, they're like, oh my God, how do I start? But if I tell you, hey, sit down tomorrow and write your first 1,000 words, they're probably already doing that. And so I do find that, what's the expression in English? Like you eat the elephant in little pieces or something like
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah. That's right.
So, so that's the idea. That's your elephant. I always say that a marathon is not 42 kilometers, it's 42 times 1 kilometer. And
Mhm.
it's the same with the book. It's the same with the procrastination for writers. You don't have to start huge, but what is something that you can do on a daily basis? So that's a very, very simple, but it's also very actionable tip.
Brilliant. I love it. And last question then, Veronica, before I let you go. And I ask everyone this question. I would have asked you this question probably last year as well, but I'm going to ask you again. What's one golden nugget of advice you would give for anyone who wants to write for a living? So just one simple thing that they can take away from this conversation today if they want to be a writer who makes money and can put that money towards maybe having more freedom to write more and be more creative. What would you advise?
My personal advice, and this is based on my own experience, is to think bigger than just writing. I find that only writing, meaning you want to write books, fantastic. That's actually really, really hard. And I say that from a place of experience. If you think bigger, that means that it's not only writing books, perhaps, it's your newsletter, it's your community. It might be other different services that require writing as a base. For example, as a public speaker, 50% of what I do is still writing when I do my courses and things like these. So I do find that if you want to go from just writing as a hobby to turning it into a business, this idea of creating a digital ecosystem where writing is at the center of it is still the epicenter. Most of what you do is writing, but it takes different shapes.
Mm.
You write scripts, you might be doing copywriting for other people, it might be newsletters, it might be digital guides, but that's the biggest advice for me is try to think bigger and what are other services, other even skills that you can pair with writing so that you can really monetize at scale.
Yeah, that's brilliant advice to leave people with today. Think bigger, guys, if you're listening to this today, and see how you can build a bit of an ecosystem maybe around your writing and scale beyond that point. Veronica, thank you so much for this. So good to talk to you again. And as I said, it's special to have you on because you're my first ever guest, and it's great to have you back again. If you're listening to this today or watching this on YouTube later, make sure you go and check out Speak to Scale. So that's Veronica's public speaking course, which is on Gumroad. I'll link to it in the show notes and in the post below, so you can get to it quickly. But Veronica, thank you so much. Great to have you here, and hope you stay safe in the midst of that typhoon that's going on right now.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I'll be back next year, I hope.
Definitely have you back anytime. Thanks so much, Veronica. Have a great day.